This is the College GameDay Podcast for Wednesday, September 4th. Harry Lyles Jr. here, filling in for Reese Davis and the great Pete Thamel with you today. Pete, how are we feeling, man? Week 2.
I don't see that great, but I appreciate the kind introduction. It is good to have you here. Obviously, big shoes to fill from Annunciation Maestro Reese Davis, typically sipping whole milk with Perry Mason on pause on his TV. I'm feeling great, man. I love week 1, Harry, more than it's my favorite weekend of the year in sports. Just you go Thursday night to Monday night, and it's just this beautiful buffet of football. You get a little bit of everything. You got some great teases. All of a sudden, we're all watching Idaho, right? Like around 10 o'clock on Saturday night, and it's like, whoa. And yeah, like we spend 8 months building up these perceptions that almost to the point where they become fact, and then they just all like burst in front of our eyes, like a balloon. So I just thought wire to wire there was 31 games on Thursday, something crazy, maybe 21. There was a ton of games right up until my local 11 here at Boston College, just quite frankly, beat Florida State wire to wire.
Somebody that has been talked about quite a lot since Saturday has been Dabo Swinney and his lack of portal usage, which is not particularly new. But when you lose in the fashion that you did against Georgia, all of the things that people think or believe that you do wrong get highlighted and put in all caps a little bit more often, Pete. I'm curious what I want to ask from your perspective, like, how do you feel? Do you feel like the conversation around that has been fair, 1, and 2, what is sort of your perspective on the entire thing?
So I feel like there's just been a lack of
adaptation there. And then that's been amplified by a bit of stubbornness and some public rhetoric. Look, Dabo has earned his place in the tip top of college football. He's won 2 national titles, and the previous 25 years at Clemson before he took charge were pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
Like they might have had a moment or two, but they were like pretty awful. So as he built that and as he built it up, he was, there was a moment in time where you could regard him as the top or second to Nick Saban coach in the entire sport. He's a Hall of Fame college football coach. But we've seen and learned over the years that coaches need to evolve to stay where they are. We've seen it in college basketball. Coach K had to evolve, right? To stay at Duke. He had to go embrace the one and done. There are all these guys over the years that constantly need to evolve in order to stay at the top of their game. And Dabo not only has not evolved in terms of the portal, he has kind of really dug his heels in and talked enough about it where if he does eventually pivot, it's going to be an ego hit for him to pivot. And I think he's going to pivot because what he'd be doing is now like mainstream. It's not like cutting edge anymore. It's all, it's anomalous that he's not. And I do think we'll see some transition and easing there. It's interesting. So like a team loses in the way that Clemson lost. Everyone's like, oh, Dabo's job's in trouble. They owe him $60 million to fire him. Yeah. He has the second most national titles of any active coach, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So like we're talking about like a top 3 coach in the sport, and he earned his defiance on this issue through the winning. Yeah. And now he has earned the scrutiny that defiance brought him. And that's where we are. I don't blame him for that stance because I think it fed into the culture and what he's built and how he's built it there. But their roster is simply inferior to the top rosters in college football. They need to figure out how to build a better one. Now, they can go contend in the ACC. They can go if you're going to lose to anyone, you lose to Georgia, right? So I'm not saying they're dead and gone, but this is this game to me is like a flashing light that's saying there needs to be evolution at Clemson, which I don't think is like some like jarring hot take criticism. I think it's just a fair synopsis of where we are at this moment.
Yes. And I think, Pete, to your point, in terms of this being the thing that we're sort of, I guess, looking through the prism of comparison, the reason to me that this is so particularly jarring is I would say Georgia is the closest thing that we've seen to the greatest dynasty in college football history with Alabama the last however many years you put it at.
What's their regular season win streak? It's like 41 or something.
It's something absurd. They've lost 2 games the last 3 years. It's incredible. And so for me, what Dabo has done is incredible. Because I personally, I mean, as somebody that grew up in the Southeast, I never thought I would see Clemson be as great as they have been under him.
Yeah.
Never envisioned
the first 10 years I did this job, I never went there.
Right. And so when you are the only team that has not just challenged the greatest dynasty that we've ever seen in college football history, but consistently challenged them, won a national championship against them, multiple national championships, to now be basically the outlier in FBS in not taking transfers. Like it was them and the 3 service academies this past year.
Yeah.
Now, David Hale did a piece for ESPN.com that sort of the idea was that like the portal is not Dabo's only problem. And I will say this, Pete, I don't think there's any amount of portaling that was going to help them beat Georgia on Saturday. Short of getting every player at every position that they wanted, it was not going to fix that issue. But I got to give Dabo this, man. Like what he does do it well. And I'm going to read you this from Dave's piece. It says Clemson's player retention rate is among the best in the country.
Yep.
Only Northwestern and Oklahoma State had fewer players leave in December in the December window than Clemson's 12. And then it goes on to talk about the graduation rate, which was the highest of any Power 4 school in comparison. Georgia's last, but it's like they're also winning football games. Clemson is the only team in the country to rank in the top 25 in both the AP rankings and graduation rates for the last 13 years. And then even when you look at the record with Swinney's approach, their record from 21 to 23, the supposed downturn of the program, as Hale has written here, was 30-10, the 8th best mark of any program in that span, which on one part is like, okay, yes, Dabo is still doing really good. And honestly, like, had he been doing this before all those national championships, he's the greatest coach in that program's history, whatever. Yes. However, I come back to the place of you were the only team that consistently challenged the greatest dynasty in the sport's history. I personally would not give that up because I think that I'm doing it the right way. Yeah. And that is where my problem lies with this. So, like, do I think the criticisms of him are fair? Like, absolutely, because that is not the hill that I would be dying on. But I also give Dabo a lot of credit, man. Like, he does what he does really damn well. And so I think there's more room for nuance there than I think people have been willing to give him over the last week.
I would agree with that. I don't think the
sky is falling or there's anything like that. It's always an interesting inflection point, Harry, when you individually have built the expectations that you no longer are meeting, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. Like, it wasn't like, I don't remember who the coach was before. Was it Tommy Bowden?
I think so.
I think it was Tommy Bowden. But the fact that we don't even remember the coach's name at this point. So when you have built the monster and you are now just very good as opposed to elite, and they have been very good. They finished the season very good last year. How does that dynamic work? Because you can just play the hypothetical, say Dabo takes the Jacksonville job. Like, who would get that job that could be better? And it's a pretty short list that may fit on a fortune cookie because they can't have Nick Saban. He's staying on the game day set. So, like once you sort of cross through those, Andy's a great fit too, by the way. Like, that, folksy Southern thing doesn't work at Iowa City or whatever, So, I just think it's a really interesting moment in time for how do you evolve, keep him comfortable and happy, but still address some of the deficiencies. I think it's a really interesting challenge for a university and for an athletic department to try to stay aligned with the guy you clearly believe in, the guy you have to believe in contractually, quite frankly, and but get him to not, you don't want to force Dabo to change.
Right.
He has to realize he needs to. And there's a difference in those two. You can force the guy with 2 years left on his deal and his coaches on expiring contracts to change, right? Because he's, it's a different deal now. So I'll be very curious how they handle things moving forward there.
And I still think, Pete, and we kind of saw this, was it last year where they had the rocky start with the Duke loss and all of that? Like, they finished the season well. Like, they've done that the last couple of years.
Sure.
Like, in fact, so much so, and this is why I know that, again, I think the critiques of him are fair, but this week might be a bit of an overreaction. A lot of us, myself included, we're like, hey, the last couple of years are some of his best coaching jobs because he did recover. They did improve as the season went along because he is a really damn good ball coach. So I feel like by the end of the year, we're going to be saying similar things about Clemson in the sense that, hey, they started off against something that is just above the rest of whatever is going on among the 136 teams I think we're at in FBS college football. Like, they'll probably be okay.
Yes. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
I think we've probably come to the conclusion that Cade Klubnik isn't it.
Yeah.
Now they don't have an answer right now, but like how they proceed at that position is going to be interesting. How they proceed with Garrett Riley, again, overreact to one game. They could go out and put 60 something on App. I've been pretty staunch in the point that the receiver talent has dipped so much there from being the best room in the country to being a mediocre ACC room, and it seemingly is better now. Georgia's not a great place to sort of find yourself, to see where you are, especially if they're up and you're chasing and everything. So I would be curious. App's good. You know that. You've done a ton of App games over the years. And NC State's good. The next week at home. And then how different does that game at Florida State feel October 5th?
Man, do any of us know what to expect in that one? I mean, that might be their easiest one. I would argue, honestly.
They got Stanford at home there too, on the 28th. So
doable.
Yes. Plaintiff 1 versus Plaintiff 2 on October 5th. The conversation's changed a little bit about those programs.
Just a little bit.
Where they are. I do think this honestly though, that for Clemson, as you're navigating this moment, you want to be in the SEC, you want to be in the Big Ten. You have made it clear legally, like this is a hot take, like you are suing your league for the ability to leave, right? Like the overall attractiveness of the program to those leagues, and this goes for Florida State too, obviously, who has been much more flamboyant, as you well know, Harry, about their ambitions. Clemson has been a little bit more buttoned up and professional and by the book about it. Florida State has sort of grabbed the megaphone and let everybody know. It's been a little quieter the last couple of weeks from the Florida State Regent crowd in that moment. But that is look, realignment is not going to stop. It's certainly not going to stop when we have a 17-team league with schools from the Bay Area and Dallas in it, right? So and four major lawsuits involving two schools sort of unfolding where we are. So it's interesting moment in time.
You know what is going to be entertaining is this game that we've got here on Saturday as we head to Ann Arbor for Texas, Michigan. Pete, I'm curious from your perspective, what stands out to you in this game here?
This is one of those like iconic game of the year type games, right? Unbelievable uniform game, logo game, tradition game. And look, 4 years ago, neither of these programs really had much of a pulse nationally. And they've both gone through surges. Obviously, Michigan's won the 3 straight Big Tens and obviously won the national title last year. And Texas broke through and was a 4th down completion ball in the air in the end zone from going to the playoff last year. So 2 really talented teams, 2 teams that put a boatload of guys in the draft last year. I believe the number was Michigan had 13 and Texas had 11 players get drafted last year. So we're talking about rosters that have been reloaded but are still very talented. And Michigan's really good again. The worry I have for them in this game, it matches, I think, what Texas's biggest weakness is. I don't think Michigan has the outside skill. There's inexperience at quarterback. They have a guy who I don't know if Davis Warren can go win you a game right now. So combine that with the fact that they have good receivers, right? But they don't have the caliber that they did that they did last year. Now, what they do have is the best tight end in the country. I had 3 scouts tell me today they think Colson Loveland is the best tight end in the country. And you could tell by watching that game because they went to him in a lot of critical third downs, a lot of big moments, a lot of red zone. He was clearly one of the focal points of their offense. I really think how Texas slows and stops him is going to be a huge part of this game. But when you look at the receiving core for Michigan, it just isn't a group that scares you, much like the defensive back room for Texas doesn't really scare you a ton.
Right.
So can they manufacture with a slew of new starters on the offensive line? Can they manufacture enough offense where they're not in third and medium to third and long and need to rely on the pass game? And I don't think so. I think the Michigan offensive line played well against Fresno, but they weren't quite there. And I think one scout put it to me this way. He said, they both lost a lot. Michigan lost more. And the offensive line was the clear identity of that program for 3 straight years. And this is a big test on whether they can reestablish that or not.
Yeah, and if they can, I mean, it would be a massive deal. Obviously, one thing that I'm curious about, Pete, and I assume you have some perspective on this, is at the quarterback position for Michigan. Maybe a lot of us were reading this wrong, but it felt like for the last month leading up to the season, it's Alex Orji or it's Jack Tuttle. I feel like I was not hearing Davis Warren's name all that much when it came to this quarterback battle. How much was he in the mix that entire time? I mean, clearly he had to have been. And is he going to have a Saturday?
So Jack Tuttle got injured. I wouldn't have been surprised if Jack Tuttle had ended up being the starter because of his age and because of his experience.
His age? You mean he's not old, is he? Did he back up Michael Penix at Indiana?
I believe he did.
Interesting.
He did. Yeah, because I want to say he went to Utah straight out of high school and was maybe the highest ranked quarterback as a recruit out of high school that they'd ever had. And then he went to Indiana, and then obviously he's got Alan Bowman vibes. So the Big Ten Network went through on their camp tour, and they reported that Tuttle had been banged up and he wasn't going to be the guy. And I was told by a couple of people who went through there, deep into camp, that Orji was getting first team reps. And so in my mind, and that matched all the rhetoric coming out of there, he was going to start. From what I heard and read, the final week is that Davis Warren went and played lights out in the final week. And I saw a couple Alex Orji throws on Saturday against Fresno that made me go, oh, okay. He just struggled to roll out and hit open guys. And if their offense is going to work, it's based on efficiency and accuracy. So Davis Warren has some arm talent. I think we saw that. But I think for now, as he grows up here, I see him more as a game manager than a guy who can go win you a game. Now, he can certainly go earn that next step. I'm not putting him in that box, but I'm just saying right now, from one game of empirical evidence, that's where it is. And he can certainly go grow from there. He's going to look more like Cade McNamara did. He's not going to look like J.J. McCarthy did, when he was out there kind of slaying Ohio State and really slinging the ball around the field. They also don't have the outside talent that they know they're going to win all the one-on-one matchups. So it's going to be an interesting adjustment with all the new pieces there. And right away, we've got a big test. And for Texas, I mean, we were there on the sidelines of Bama last year. They announced themselves back to college football week 2, same scenario. That was a big, Quinn Ewers, that really swung him from, elite prospect, good player to high-end draft pick. That game, completely spun the pendulum on how we thought about Quinn Ewers. And I think this game, he's in the first round conversation. This game could solidify him as a QB1 type guy if he goes into the big house the same way he went to Tuscaloosa and it picks them apart. I was impressed with Michigan defensively, Harry. I feel like Wake Martindale did a really good job on third down, confusing them, blitzing. He's kind of one of these exotic blitz masters from the NFL. Michigan has the 2 best defensive tackles in the country and the best pairing. Certainly, they may be better individual tackles, but. And they have Will Johnson who jumped that route. Did you see his pick 6?
Yes. That is a bad man.
Yes. So on all 3 levels there, you have really good players. You got Kenneth Grant at the nose. You got Mason Graham, who made every big stop and every big tackle for this Michigan team last year. He's a true junior from out in California. And then the buzzy name amongst scouts and people who saw Michigan practice this summer was Jay Sean Barham. He's a Maryland transfer. He's a junior linebacker. He has the look of everything the NFL wants. I believe I looked on Saturday night. I think he only had one tackle against Fresno. So sometimes the tangibles don't match up with the results, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy who's out there for a bunch of snaps and they're going to rely on him to make stops in the run game. So that's my sort of 30,000-foot analysis, Harry. What are you going to look for in the game?
I am looking forward to, obviously the question that we need to see is with that Michigan offense against that Texas defense. But man, I am not going to miss a Texas offensive possession against that Michigan defense. Because man, that's strong against strong. And I love this Texas receiving core. Obviously they added Isaiah Bond. And Matthew Golden is a guy that with Dana Holgerson's staff at Houston, they were sick when they lost him. Like they were like, that is a guy that because they were really good there for a minute at churning out guys and really getting the most out of them. And they thought that guy was going to be their next gem. And so obviously seeing him go to an in-state school was upsetting for them. But that receiving core, you mentioned, that Michigan defense has NFL guys on all three levels. I believe people should expect, I'm going to tease a little countdown to game day here. I believe we start at 8:20 on Saturdays now, so we can get the crowd involved a little bit. Harry Douglas should be breaking down for us that Texas receiving core against Will Johnson.
Well, nobody knows better than HD.
Hey, right. So that is really what I'm looking forward to in this particular matchup. But Pete, I got to be honest with you, what I'm looking forward to even more so than this particular game it's just this crowd, this atmosphere, I think that we're going to see on Saturday. Because you mentioned, it's a logo game. It's a dynasties game. It's the intrigue, all of it, the ranking, one of these monster mashups on campus early in the season, right? Because the neutral site games, hey man, we'll show up wherever, but these on campus site games are great. The people in Ann Arbor are obviously going to show out. I think we're going to see a pretty good Texas contingency as well here.
Oh, yeah. If you're a diehard
Longhorn,
this is a once-a-generation opportunity, right?
Yeah. So, I won't necessarily break out the Stetson again this year, or I'm sorry, this week, like I did last week, since I don't want to upset any of the Ann Arbor faithful. But it's going to be a fun atmosphere out there on Saturday.
Yeah. No, obviously, the big house is the big house, right? It's a cauldron of passion. This is obviously the first big game. They play Fresno at home, but it's the first real statement game where all eyes are going to be on Michigan since they won that national title last year. By the way, Barham had 2 tackles against Fresno in a hurry, so I don't want to. He had one solo tackle, so I just want to make sure I clean that up here when I was looking the other night. I really think it should be a great football game. We'll make our picks, Harry, later this week to see who we do favor in this game. What did you think you learned from Texas against Colorado State, Harry?
I thought they handled things well. I had mentioned this on our show that Colorado State, I think, is going to be a team that is better than what people think. This year, at least improved. That Colorado game that they're going to be playing is going to be fantastic. It was great last year. It's going to be better this year. Texas, I feel like we got what we expected out of them. I think obviously the big question still remains in that backfield, right? You're not really going to see or use that particular game as a litmus test of how much of a loss CJ Baxter is for that particular group. But I think for the Longhorns, we joke about Texas being back, right? We saw it last year. This team, Steve Sarkisian has them where they need to be. I'm not using the word back anymore. We're not doing that. It's old. Get that out of your vocabulary. It's done. They are established. They are one of the college football powers again. I think we will find out much more about them this week. Obviously than we did against Colorado State, but I felt like it was about what we expected. I mean, we even got to see some Arch Manning, so that was fun.
Oh, Arch Manning plays for Texas?
I heard that he did.
Am I intrigued of what Arch Man's gonna look like? Sure, but I also don't need to know right now. Like I
That's how
was,
we know, Pete. Texas is doing pretty dang good, right? Like they're here. They're all the way back. We don't need to do any of this nonsense. Like they are established. Steve Sarkisian, very happy for him too, given his path, just along the last 10 years, I guess you could say. It's just really cool to see him just get everything together, both for him professionally and personally. So certainly we want to see everybody do well, right? But it's a little cool to see Steve Sarkisian in particular succeeding.
you were at one of those Thursday games in Columbia, Missouri. You got the first look at the potential playoff Missouri Tigers. Be curious your on the ground impressions, and then our listeners know when you call a game like Harry does. He does sideline with Matt Barry and Dan Mullen. You kind of get like 36 hours in the bubble of the teams, right?
Yeah.
You're at walkthroughs, you're sitting in coaching meetings, you're in the facility, you're talking to assistants, you're talking to players. So I always feel like the guys who go and call games get a really good pulse. So
Mhm.
give us a little bit of Missouri and your takeaways as they live in this orbit on as a contender for the college football
Yeah.
playoff. Their ranking says they're a contender. They're a contender.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was definitely, I would say, a confident group. And when you go into a lot of these meetings, you can tell when teams really believe in what they've got going on, and you can tell when other guys are trying to sort of talk themselves into what they think that they can be. This is a team that knows that they are good. It is a team that wants to show that they are good. And I think with Eli Drinkwitz, one of the things that he was talking about, which this game, honestly, I know a lot of people look at it and say, oh, Murray State, this is an FCS program. They're new to the Missouri Valley Conference. Like, what does Mizzou care about this game? They had 6'5", Pete, new players, brand
That's
new head
bonkers.
coach, right? An offensive coordinator that I believe, if I have this correct, hadn't coached since 2021. So like this was a unique thing. Like Drinkwitz was telling us, like, hey, like I was calling up Sean Clark, trying to find out, hey, like what do I need to know about this guy that they brought in? And again, they had 65 of those. So it was a unique challenge for them. Although obviously, if you kept up with the game, it was not much of a challenge after the first like 6 minutes or so. But a team.
What does Luther Burden look like field level? Sorry to cut you off. Like that's what I want to know. He's like one of the 5 most exciting players in the sport. When you're standing there tracking him, what is that like?
That's an NFL player.
Yeah.
Like there's just some where it's like physique, skill, all the things. Like, some guys have one or the other, or, a few different traits, or, whatever. He's got everything.
So you got a little aura to him? Like the good
Yes.
ones, there's like a little glow.
Yes, 100%. Honestly, that entire receiver room has sort of that glow. And the interesting thing with them was Theo Weiss is really sort of the leader in that room, and really talked to us about like, hey, and Drink sort of backed him up on this, was that, when Luther came in, he had some maturing that he needed to do, which I don't think is unique to Luther necessarily. I think you could say that about most 18-year-olds that end up going to college.
He went 6 months early, by the way.
Yes, 100%. And so, for Theo, mind you, he spent his first 3 seasons at Oklahoma. And one of the guys that he learned to mature from was CD Lamb.
Yeah, okay.
He ended up just all right. I think, he had a pretty solid week last week, a much wealthier week, if you will. And so Theo knew that once he saw Luther and the potential that he had, obviously he was highly touted recruit, that he needed a little bit of direction to become the player that he needed to be. And obviously now we are talking about him in the manner that he should perhaps be wide receiver 1 come April. And they came out and they showed that they are going to be a difficult team to deal with, Pete. And I think one of the other things that was a big question for this Missouri team was that backfield, because you lose Cody Schrader, just got picked up by the Rams last week.
Oh, nice. I didn't realize that. He's an easy guy to root for.
Oh, 100%. Are you kidding me? So, Drink was like, hey,
we'll root for them all day. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Drink was like, hey, what do we do to replace a guy like that? You go get the 2 best running backs from the Sun Belt. Marcus Carroll from my Georgia State Panthers and Nate Noel from App State. And
you
both
weren't
of those
giving that
guys look the
NIL
part.
money to your alma mater, Harry, or he'd still be
Hey,
running for the Panthers.
you would think $20 goes a long way, and it does not.
Hey,
So
Nate Noel was a good back. We had him for game day when we were there at App State 2 years ago. He's a good player, man.
yes, like if he is healthy, he's going to be somebody to deal. I mean, if you can keep both of those guys healthy and in that backfield, like, look, replacing Cody Schrader is a big ask, but like if you're keeping those two guys fresh back there along with that receiving core, Mizzou's going to be a tough out, man. And their schedule, a lot of people look at it and say it's easy. It might be like easy for like an SEC team. Like there's still some on there where you're like, hey, like you still got to go out there and play 60 minutes.
Suddenly, Missouri plays Buffalo this week, Harry. The Boston College game in 2 weeks, or 2 weekends, I guess we should say. Again, I'm not saying it looms. It could be the only game between ranked teams on the schedule.
That Missouri receiving room is extremely talented top to bottom.
And Norfleet, the tight end's very good too, right?
Yes, he actually had gotten injured in that game. I believe it was a right shoulder, if I recall correctly.
Good sideline reporter, still giving us the specifics.
Yeah, I don't believe he returned for that second half, but he should be okay as far as I understand.
Okay. Yeah. No, I don't think it's a long-term thing, but they think he's like a high end draftable guy in their program,
Yes.
They've spoken of him in terms, I believe he's only a sophomore, right?
Yes. And I mean, Pete, when you look at that team, I mean, it is loaded. It really is. Like I know they lost some guys last year, especially on the defensive side of the ball, but even some of the young guys that they've got on there, like Williams and Wannery, like that guy is going to be nuts. Okay. Like they have really built up something over there at Missouri that I think is going to be sustainable.
All right. That's very interesting on the ground perspective because that's just a team that didn't generate a ton of conversation. They played sort of a sleepy Thursday game that they were up by so much you weren't compelled to watch, in the way you were North Dakota State and Colorado. But yeah, look, one of the joys of college football to me, Harry, is that there's always some team that just sort of crashes in from out of nowhere and gives a campus a once a decade kind of like sensation, right? And Missouri certainly is gonna, you could make an argument that it's going to be an exciting year in Columbia, and I'm not saying they're going to go undefeated or win the SEC, but they are to me the epitome of the team that the playoff gives hope to. Whereas if you had to go win the SEC, they're sure they have a chance. I don't know, but the playoff and a bit of a favor schedule gives them puts them in the conversation for this season, which is good for people in our chair because Eli Drinkwitz is certainly an entertaining coach, as I'm sure you found out from
100%
bantering around Columbia for a bit. So never, I'll always be a fan of. He's almost like a college basketball coach. He's got the one-liners ready to zip and to go. So
yeah, no, I love it. He has a great time out there, and that's what this should be, right? It's football. Like I'm here for a good time.
We're all in the entertainment business. We were just at A&M for that Notre Dame game. We're going to be in Ann Arbor for this Texas game. I mean, these are awesome games, moments, nights for the sport, showcases for the sport. Mm-hmm. How worried are you that the playoff era is going to squeeze these games out of our itineraries as opposed to compel athletic directors to keep scheduling them? Because look, we can't root for teams, right? But we can root for good games, right? I have no problem saying I would much rather go to this game than watch a mismatch like you did last Thursday, right? Yeah. And there's a place for those in the ecosystem, don't get me wrong. But I just think because the great leagues now have sort of gobbled up a lot of the great teams, there may be a temptation to not have these sort of cross matchups, which I just think would be a devastating blow for the sport, and it would be an unbelievably devastating blow for the fan.
Yeah, I think, Pete, to your point, that is one of my biggest gripes with the 12-team playoff. The other one is that, and I always use this example, and I have beaten this horse past beyond death, is that for a game like Ohio State, Michigan last year, those stakes are gone. Right? Yeah. Like, and you have essentially moved those stakes now to the teams that are going to be vying for the final spots in the playoff. And we're all going to enjoy it. You could put, to me, college football, Pete, is like pizza. You could put I'm not going to name brands. I'm not giving y'all free advertising, but think of any of the brands of pizza that you can get from the best to the worst. If you put some pizza in front of me, I'm eating it. Okay. Like, right. Like no one's looked at some pizza. I mean, I personally can't think of any examples of this where I looked at it and I was like, I'm not going to eat that. If pizza's in front of me, I'm going to eat it. College football's pizza. I'm going to consume it. Right.
Yes.
I'm going to enjoy it. It's in front of me. It is a thing that I like. But have you taken us from, some S tier college football, some S tier pizza, some gourmet pizza to like perhaps some, again, insert the brand of pizza that you don't particularly like or enjoy as much as the S tier
you
pizza?
Just
like,
say
yes.
Microwave pizza or like toaster oven pizza.
Fair enough.
I don't think we're going to I use Pizzeria Regina's here in Boston. You ever been there?
No.
Yeah. Next time you're up for a BC game.
Yeah. I'm holding you to that.
That's the good stuff. I'll take you. I completely agree. Like the consumption is going to be the consumption. We need to figure out a way, and I think a lot of this is going to be incumbent on the way this first and second playoff are chosen, Harry. Like to not punish someone's going to lose this game on Saturday night, right?
Yep.
And someone's still going to want to try to rally and regroup and make the playoff. And that's very viable considering the paths they have to take. Be very interesting for Michigan, by the way. Which did not test itself out of conference the past couple of years, to now all of a sudden have to turn around and play USC at home in 2 weeks. So we're gonna learn a lot about Davis Warren, this Michigan offense, this new offensive line, and this group of receivers that's trying to find an identity and find some footing. We're gonna learn a lot about them very quickly by the end of September, because they even have. They have Minnesota coming in too. Now their advantage is they don't leave the big house until they go to Seattle on October 5th for Washington. But look, I think Minnesota we saw the other night without Darius Taylor is going to be a solid Big Ten team. So those are 3 good tests early that we'll have a really good idea by the time the calendar flips to October how good Michigan is, and there's still like a lot of room for them to recover if they take a few months to find themselves, which happens with teams. They get 13 guys drafted. I think they had 18 guys drafted to the combine. So it's an interesting moment for them here, because I felt like the last 2 seasons, especially, they were really allowed to like ease into their identity and really find themselves for when they were humming when those big games came in October and beyond. And they're not going to get that chance to do that now.
Yeah, and Pete, to your point, going back to sort of the scheduling and playoff implications of all of this, I think it's very important to distinguish, like, for the difference in a early Michigan loss and the losses that we just saw for Florida State, because like those are in conference, like those are 2 entirely different conversations. If Michigan loses on Saturday, like they still have a whole Big Ten slate to play, like they're still A-okay. From that regard. So whereas Florida State has much more ground to make up, even if they had just lost, let's say, one of those games, from that particular perspective. So, and we sit here today on September 4th, 2024, and college football could look completely different by the time we do this next year. Which
probably not next year, but
maybe not next year.
Yeah, but it's coming.
Never say never.
The only thing that I know is it's not looking like this for long term. That's the only certainty. So
yes, this is temporary. Yes. Just like me hosting this podcast, Pete. I appreciate you letting me crash the party.
Fun.
Next week Reese and that beautiful head of hair of his will be back. But for now, I am going to get out of here. Pete, I need to go get me a little workout in, man. And I know you got some stuff to do. So thank you guys for listening to the College Game Day Podcast. Please download the podcast wherever you prefer to get your podcast, or better yet, subscribe so you never miss a single episode.